The audio started and my soul fell into an abyss. It was my daughter's voice. But it wasn't for me. I was alone in the kitchen, stirring my still hot coffee, when my phone vibrated on the table. I absent-mindedly pressed play, expecting a normal message, maybe a quick note. But seconds were enough for my entire body to freeze. Her voice was filled with calculated sweetness, that tone only used to seduce someone. And with each word, I understood more fully. That message was for her husband, not me. The shock was like an electric current coursing through my bones. I didn't know whether to drop the phone, scream, or cry. But I stood there, speechless, the coffee dripping from the pot, burning on the stove, while my daughter uttered sentences that tore me apart. She wasn't just talking about him, she was talking about me too. Like someone spitting out a dirty secret. She reduced me to a weight, an obstacle, a burden. The clock on the wall seemed to mock my helplessness with every tick. My breath became shallow, my heart pounding like a war drum. I felt my skin burn, not from the hot steam of the coffee, but from the shame of being stripped naked like that, as if my own daughter had forgotten I was human. My first reaction was denial. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was just a stray phrase. But it only took a few more seconds to realize there was no mistake. She was speaking of me with contempt. Worse, she spoke as if she had a plan. There was something hidden in that tone. Something that went beyond venomous words spoken in the heat of the moment. It was like opening a drawer and finding inside not just dust, but a coiled snake. A detail, a slip, that revealed a greater rot. My daughter wasn't just complaining about me. She was confessing. She just didn't know I would be the witness. My hand trembled. I pressed the pause button, but I couldn't put the phone down. The phrases kept echoing in my mind, each syllable like a knife. She's just getting in the way. It's past time. No one will notice. Words like that aren't simple oversights. They're the seeds of something growing in the dark. I leaned against the table, trying not to collapse. The smell of burnt coffee filled the kitchen, heavy, acidic, as if reminding me that even simple things could be lost in seconds. The silence after the audio was more deafening than screams. It was the silence of betrayal. I closed my eyes and suddenly it all came back. The muffled giggles when I entered the room, the sideways glances, the comments disguised as jokes about my appearance, my hair, my skin. I'd always kept quiet. I'd always swallowed it. I'd always thought, she's young, she doesn't understand, she'll change. But now it wasn't ignorance. It was choice. It was coldness. The scariest thing was that, amid the venom, there was a hidden detail. Something that wasn't just about me. A thinly veiled shred of truth. A loose thread in a fabric of lies. If I pulled, perhaps everything would fall apart. And that suspicion chilled me more than the contempt itself. With each heartbeat, I felt less like a wounded mother and more like a woman waking up. I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. I couldn't convince myself it was just fleeting anger. This was proof. This was a map to something greater. I gripped my phone tightly, like someone holding a loaded gun. I didn't know what I would do yet. I was certain of one thing. After that audio, nothing would ever be the same again. And the burning question wasn't whether I could bear the pain. The question was, how far is my daughter capable of going? And what will I do with what I've accidentally discovered? I stood still, my phone still warm in my palm, as if the object had become a living fragment of the betrayal I'd just heard. The audio wasn't long, but it left deep marks like invisible burns. The kitchen felt smaller, almost suffocating. The white walls, once familiar, now closed in like a windowless room. Even the distant noise from the street, the hurried footsteps of neighbors, everything seemed muffled, as if I were underwater. Every second, the memory of my daughter's words replayed in my mind. It wasn't just the content but the tone. A mixture of rehearsed sweetness and silent venom, like someone blowing perfume over something rotten. There, in those sentences, was the reflection of years of small gestures I had silently swallowed. The forced smiles when she asked me for something, the impatient corrections to my way of speaking, the sidelong glances at family gatherings, as if I were a misplaced prop. I wanted to believe they were unimportant details. Now, I realized they were shards of a larger mirror, and I was bleeding as I put the pieces back together. The pain wasn't just a mother's. It was the pain of a woman who dedicated her entire life to raising, feeding, and supporting, and yet still became invisible. How many times had I spent nights awake, praying for her strength on difficult days? How many times had I neglected to buy something for myself, just to ensure she had the best? And now, hearing my daughter reduce me to a nuisance, a burden that should be eliminated, was like having every sacrifice spit back in my face. But there was something more, something hidden behind those words. It wasn't just ingratitude, it was strategy. The way she spoke wasn't like someone simply venting. It was like someone preparing the groundwork, like someone planning a move. It ate away at me. My mind whirled around the question I couldn't keep quiet. Why would she need her husband to hear that? What was this plot in which I became a disposable part? With each memory, I saw myself huddled in a crowded living room, trying to smile as their gazes met above my head, as if I didn't exist. Or I remembered the time during lunch when she corrected my fork holding in front of the guests, laughing softly, and I, my face burning, pretended to find it amusing. It's these memories that come flooding back now, making it clear that the contempt was never truly hidden. It was just me who refused to see it. Perhaps that's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation like someone breathing while finally telling the truth. Because there's a silent recognition, a bitter acknowledgement that love doesn't always protect against cruelty within one's own home. I held my phone tightly, like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of a shipwreck. My body wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. What arose in me wasn't despair. It was a spark of clarity. Something had changed, and even without knowing exactly where it would lead, I couldn't go back. Deep down, I sensed that that audio wasn't just an open wound. It was also a key. And by turning that key, I could discover doors I'd previously pretended didn't exist. What I found when I crossed that line was far greater than I could have imagined. That night, when the entire house fell silent, I listened to the audio again. It was like poking at an open wound, but I needed to understand every detail, every inflection. The sound of her breathing before speaking, the muffled laughter mid-sentence, even the knowing tone when she pronounced her husband's name. The more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't just a rant. It was a carefully woven plot, a conversation carrying hidden intentions. The solitude of my room became a courtroom. The walls watched me like silent witnesses. The lamp cast a dim light that seemed to mock my vulnerability. And I, sitting on the edge of the bed, held that cell phone like a double-edged sword, an instrument of pain and revelation at the same time. My heart beat wildly in my chest, as if trying to escape. It wasn't just the fear of losing my daughter. It was the feeling of being confronted with something bigger, dirtier, more dangerous. The audio wasn't just about contempt. It hinted at decisions, alliances, even veiled threats. Scattered words like, "No one will notice. It's only a matter of time. She doesn't know anything." Each sentence was a growing shadow, a warning that I wasn't just dealing with grief. I was at the center of a game I never knew existed. My eyes burned. For a moment, I closed them and imagined the past. I remembered the first time I held her in my arms, so small, so fragile, and the silent vow I made to never let anything bad happen to her. The image of the braided girl running through the yard was still etched in my mind. But now, superimposed on that memory, was the cold face of the woman who referred to me as an obstacle. The contrast crushed me. How could the same child who once called me a heroine now see me as a burden? I got out of bed and went to the window. Outside, the street was asleep. The streetlights cast yellowish lights that barely dispelled the darkness. The scene seemed to reflect my own state, a glimmer of hope fighting against an ocean of shadows. I felt two opposing forces within me: the love that still wanted to believe in an explanation, and the fear that already knew the truth. It was in this conflict that I realized the true weight of what I was dealing with. It wasn't just my dignity that was being eroded. There were unseen consequences that could spill over far beyond me. If she was capable of speaking to me like that, what else would she be willing to do in silence? How far would she go to erase any trace that bothered her? The night wore on, and with each passing hour I became more aware that this message could not be ignored. It was like a flame lit in the middle of a room full of gunpowder. One wrong move and everything would explode. Yet, there was something inside me that prevented me from extinguishing this fire. I needed to see where it would take me. The feeling was clear. That audio was just the beginning. And what was about to emerge from the shadows could be even more devastating than my first suspicions. The dawn enveloped me in its heavy silence, but within me there was a restlessness that wouldn't let me rest. I paced back and forth, trying to organize my thoughts, and with each step I felt like carrying invisible stones on my shoulders. The audio kept echoing, but instead of just pain, it was now beginning to awaken something different within me, almost like a bitter lucidity. It was as if, for the first time, I was seeing my own life from the outside, without the curtains of affection that had always blinded me. As I walked, I surveyed my living room. The picture frames lined the bookshelf, each holding photos of moments I treasured. Smiles frozen in time, birthday parties, celebrations where I believed our union was real. Each image seemed to mock me, as if to say, "Look how you believed in the scenario they created around you." And suddenly, I felt the ground shake inside my chest. Had it all always been an act? Or was it just me who insisted on wearing rose-colored glasses to endure the barbs of everyday life? I stopped before one photo in particular, my daughter still a teenager, leaning against me, her arm around my shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. I held the glass of the frame as if I could wring an answer from it. The contrast was cruel. Yesterday charged with tenderness and today poisoned by secrets. This collision of times made me take a deep breath, trying not to give in to the temptation to believe that the entire past was a lie. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the hardness grew later, fueled by ambitions, vanities, choices I never controlled. This thought brought a pause. A moment in which, despite the hardship, I allowed myself to remember that the love I gave was not in vain. That the story I built, even if now stained by betrayal, still had moments of truth. And it is at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message touched them, as if each memory were also a mirror for their own hidden pain. But my breath was soon swallowed up by reality. I sat back down, closed my eyes, and listened to the distant sound of the street, lonely cars passing like nocturnal ghosts. It was as if each noise reminded me that the world outside continued on, indifferent to the intimate tragedy I was experiencing. The contrast made me wonder, how many people walk the sidewalks with their hearts in pieces, hiding behind ordinary gestures the silent wars they face at home? Perhaps that's why my hands wouldn't let go of that cell phone, as if I carried not just a personal secret, but a reflection of something much greater. The weight of what I'd heard was beginning to take on a new form within me. It wasn't just hurt. It was a call to open my eyes, to understand that I could no longer live numb to the habit of excusing everything. The audio had pulled me out of my blindness. And this lucidity was painful, but also dangerous, because now I knew there was a path forward, and that nothing could return me to the ignorance I'd known before. As the dawn faded and the first faint light of morning filtered through the window, I realized the worst was yet to come. It felt like standing on the edge of an abyss, staring down, knowing that within that darkness lay something that would completely change the way I saw not only my daughter but myself. The first light of morning filtered through the thin curtains and spread across the living room floor, as if trying to soften the darkness that still lingered around me. I stared into that timid glow, and for a moment I almost believed I might find some relief. But the weight inside me didn't dissipate with the clarity. It was as if the light further exposed the shadows I discovered. With each breath, I felt the tension build, like a taut string about to snap. The silence in the house at that moment was cruel. All that could be heard was the sound of birds outside, singing as if nothing had changed. And yet, for me, everything had changed. The sound of my daughter haunted me like an insistent ghost, repeating phrases that wouldn't let me rest. I no longer listened just with my ears, but with my entire body. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and even my hands felt a tremor that wouldn't stop. I looked at the picture frames again and noticed how the morning light made the glass shine, casting reflections across the wall. It was as if those images wanted to break free from time, scream at me, show me that the life stored there no longer corresponded to reality. I felt a strange mixture of tenderness and repulsion. I wanted to embrace that memory of the girl who had once called me mother with such love, but at the same time I wanted to turn my face away so as not to face what she had become. And it was in this conflict that something began to grow inside me. It wasn't just pain. It was a hybrid feeling made of fear and hope. Fear of what I still didn't know, of what might surface if I kept tugging at that thread hidden in her words. Hope that, perhaps, understanding everything would finally give me a strength I never knew I possessed. Like a scar that, instead of marring the skin, transforms into a mark of resistance. I remembered when, as a young man, I was told to lower my head, to accept things as they were. I often obeyed, believing that silence was synonymous with wisdom. But now, in this moment, I realized the danger of this habit. The silence that had once protected me was about to swallow me whole. The revelation hidden in the audio pushed me out of this shell. I could no longer remain silent. The contrast between the outside world and my inner world was brutal. On the street, children laughed on their way to school. Neighbors chatted animatedly. Inside, my chest carried a war no one could imagine. And this difference made me wonder. How many stories like mine are hidden behind closed doors? How many mothers, how many women are seen only as shadows while within them a volcano smolders, ready to erupt? With each passing second, the sense of urgency grew. It was like walking down a narrow hallway, lit by a dim light, knowing that at the end was a door. I didn't yet know what lay behind it, but I already understood that I couldn't turn back. What my daughter had said wasn't just an insult, it was a sign. And signs, when ignored, can turn into tragedies. As the morning broke outside, I felt increasingly closed in, as if I were about to suffocate from it all. But along with the suffocation was a strange certainty. What I had discovered wasn't the worst yet. The deepest part remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to surface. And I could already sense its approach, like someone hearing footsteps in the darkness. The sun had already risen, but the light streaming through the window didn't dispel the darkness that had settled within me. It was curious how light could be so deceptive. The room was bathed in gold. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze, and yet I felt as if I lived in darkness. There was something inside me that didn't light up, as if a shadow had fallen over my soul. I walked to the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee from the early morning still lingering in the air. It was as if the entire house held the memory of that night, a silent accomplice to everything I had heard. I grabbed a clean cup and filled it with fresh coffee, but as I lifted it to my lips, I realized the taste no longer brought me the comfort it once had. Each sip was bitter, as if my own tears had mixed with the drink. As I watched the steam rise from the cup, I thought about how many times that everyday gesture had been my refuge. Coffee always reminded me that there was routine, that there was stability. But now even that seemed fragile. If even a daughter's love could be eroded, what guarantee was there in the world? The warmth of the drink contrasted with the chill gripping my chest. It was a silent struggle, fire against ice, life against emptiness. I approached the window and saw the children playing in the street. They ran, screamed, stumbled, and laughed as if the world were a safe place. The scene made me smile for a second, but soon brought a sharp pain. I too had once believed in innocence, had once run free, trusting that life would sustain me. Now, looking from within, I realized that trust could be shattered by a simple sound. The contrast between their lightness and the weight I carried tore me apart. I ran my hand across the kitchen table, as if the touch could anchor me to reality. But reality, at that moment, was made of unanswerable questions. How far would my daughter go with this? What did those stray phrases really mean? And, most importantly, what would happen to me if I remained still, pretending not to hear the signals? With every passing minute, the dilemma deepened. On one side, there was the stubborn hope that it was all just a misunderstanding, that the girl who once held my hand still existed somewhere. On the other, there was the overwhelming fear that I was standing on a precipice, and that the fall had already begun. Hope and fear intertwined like two struggling snakes, each trying to suffocate the other within me. Time seemed slower, as if the clock had lost its rush. I heard each second tick by, but each tick was heavy, loaded with meaning. It was like waiting for an inevitable announcement, like being in a room where the door slowly opens and you don't know who will enter. The suspense lay not only in what I heard, but in what had yet to be revealed. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a family secret at stake. It was something that spilled over into my very identity, into how I saw myself and how the world saw me. And on that morning that seemed so ordinary, I realized that nothing about me would ever be ordinary again. I stood there in front of the window, holding the now cold cup, with a feeling that I was living the exact moment in which life holds its breath before revealing the next blow. The morning silence was no longer the same. There was a strange vibration in the air, as if every object in the house had become aware of what I carried within. My cell phone, sitting quietly on the table, felt heavier than it should have, as if it held not just an audio file, but an entire destiny. Every time my eyes fell upon it, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the reminder that something had already been said and could no longer be erased. And at the same time, I began to notice the reflections of this secret in the small gestures of my day. The way my daughter had been looking at me these past few weeks, as if measuring my every move, now made sense. Her husband's uncomfortable silence at family gatherings, the way he avoided my gaze, also took on a new color. What I had previously attributed to indifference was revealed as part of a larger plot. It was as if the audio had lifted the veil, revealing details that had always been there for me, but which I hadn't wanted to see. It felt like being in a room full of smiling people, but where I was the only one listening to the music playing in the background. The gestures repeated themselves, the lines seemed normal, but the hidden melody betrayed the farce. I felt out of place but also attentive. Every word spoken at the table, every exchange of glances between them, was now interpreted through a different lens. And this new lens filled me with both fear and power. As I thought about this, I remembered all the times I'd fought alone against invisible chains. The effort to smile even when I was the target of veiled comments, the exhaustion of having to prove my worth to people who saw me as less than. Now, this effort took on another dimension. It wasn't just about resisting, but about understanding that my silence fueled others' plots. And this understanding made me want to fight back. It was impossible not to think about the consequences. If I stood still, trapped in fear, I would likely be swallowed up by it. But if I acted, if I decided to use the truth that had fallen into my hands, the game would change. It was like holding a rare chess piece. One right move could turn the entire game around. But at the same time, every misstep could cost me dearly. This duality kept me awake, every muscle in my body on alert, as if I were about to cross a rickety bridge over a chasm. And it's curious how, faced with this kind of revelation, many people feel the urge to speak out, to share their own hidden pain. It's as if, upon hearing my story, each person also revisits their scars, realizing that the enemy isn't always outside. Perhaps that's why so many end up leaving their reflections in the air, almost like an echo, because they know that keeping silent is also a way of losing oneself. Time passed slowly, but tension built quickly within me. I knew I hadn't seen everything yet, that more shadows lurked. The audio was just the tip of the iceberg, and what lay beneath promised to be much deeper and more cutting. With each memory, with each glimpse reconstructed in my memory, I drew closer to a revelation that seemed inevitable. And it was precisely this sense of inevitability that kept me holding my breath, as if I were about to witness something that would change not only my life, but the way everyone saw me. The day advanced like a thick tide, and I found myself walking through the house as if measuring unfamiliar terrain, mentally noting every unevenness in the floor. My cell phone still rested on the table like a stone in the center of a lake, sending out silent ripples that touched everything. I picked it up carefully, took a deep breath, and opened the file again. There were almost imperceptible noises before my daughter's voice. A door in the background, the scraping of a chair, perhaps a glass being placed on a surface. I closed my eyes and tried to piece together the scene. It was like peering through a crack in a window, discerning the room by its echo. Her voice emerged, polished, as if filtered through sweetness. Beneath it, the blade. The way she paused before saying my name gave me chills, as if there were a studied hesitation there, a mask adjusting itself to her face. I walked to the porch to breathe. The street continued its rhythm. A fruit vendor shouting the day's specials, a dog fighting for territory with the wind, children running with backpacks almost as big as theirs. Life has a cruel way of continuing. I watched the sky, half faded, thin clouds crossing like scarves. I felt like dissolving into that fabric, forgetting. At the same time, a stubborn impulse pulled me back. I couldn't erase what I knew. Not now. Hope appeared timidly, like a ray of light behind the balcony of an old house, but soon confronted the challenge. Which path should I take to avoid losing myself? I went back inside and looked around the room with eyes that were no longer the same as yesterday. The objects had a different gravity. The table, witness to so many lunches. The worn little sofa on the left arm where I always sat. The bookshelf with its books and photographs. Everything seemed to demand a decision from me. I thought of my daughter's face, of how the afternoon light drew a precise shadow on the curve of her chin when we were in the backyard years ago. I think of this and my chest tightens, not only for the loss of what was, but for the uncertainty of what remains. Between the sweet memory and the bitter discovery, a narrow strip of land where I must walk without falling. The last family gatherings came back to me as dimly lit scenes. Her husband avoided my questions, responding with short sentences, always friendly, always too neutral. The sudden rush to end visits, the excuse of a commitment, the smile that didn't reach his eyes. At the time, I attributed it to shyness. Now, I place each gesture on an imaginary table and analyze it like someone examining seams. I find loose stitches, lines that don't cross where they should, one fold hiding another. The progress is real. I'm beginning to see the pattern. But with each advance, an obstacle tests me, as if the fabric resists being unraveled. I felt the urge to talk to someone, to ask for an outside perspective. But the question lingered. Who could I trust? Loneliness has a sound, and it filled the house with a low, constant vibration. Yet, within that low sound, a clearer note vibrated. I don't know where it came from, perhaps from myself. I could choose to be small and silent, or I could become a woman who observes, records, and guards. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Those who observe breathe. Those who record are not lost. Those who guard build a thread to pull later. I went to my bedroom and opened the dresser drawer. I touched the old letters, messages from a time when everything seemed simpler. Paper has an honesty that the glass of screens doesn't. I set the letters aside and returned to the present. The house smelled of soap, of old ceilings, of coffee gone cold. The light distorted the shadows in the corners, as if to remind me that nothing is straight when seen up close. I needed to accept that clarity is a shy animal. It appears, shows off for a second, then runs off into the woods. With each thought an image. With each image a new question. If this was a performance, what was the stage? Who wrote the lines, and who just memorized them? Where was the exact spot on the floor that should give way for me to see the basement? I felt my breath catch, but I didn't back down. I walked through the house like someone testing the floorboards with the tip of my foot, listening for creaks, mapping out areas of risk. There's courage in small steps. The afternoon pressed against the glass like a curious face. The shadow lay against the walls, and for a moment, the house seemed to hold its own voice, as if it too were waiting for something to speak. I myself stopped, in the middle of the living room, cell phone in hand, and felt the air between me and the next gesture hold the density of a secret. This wasn't the time for answers. It was time to see clearly what still insisted on hiding itself. And right there, in that pause like a bated breath, I realized that the next step wouldn't come from haste, but from the precise weight of a detail I hadn't yet noticed. The afternoon stretched on, and with it, my thoughts seemed to take on a shadow of their own, occupying every corner of the house. I still held my cell phone as if it were a fragile piece of glass, aware that a sudden movement could shatter not only the object but also the illusion of stability I had left. The silence between my four walls had never felt so dense, almost palpable, as if it were made of dust suspended in the air, waiting for the slightest gesture to disintegrate. I began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. The creak of the wood in the hallway, the soft tapping of the window against the frame, even the sound of footsteps coming from the street seemed to enter the scene like disguised memories. Every detail made me reflect. There are signs that only reveal themselves when our gaze changes. And my gaze was no longer the same. Now, every noise carried meaning, every silence hid questions. I stopped in front of the living room mirror and stared at my own reflection. The woman staring back at me wasn't just a mother wounded by an unexpected audio message. She was also someone who found herself in a state of transition, as if crossing a river whose waters moved too fast for her feet to find purchase. Her eyes betrayed weariness, but also a spark that hadn't been there yesterday. The mix of vulnerability and clarity disconcerted me. It was as if, at the same time as I recognized myself, I was also seeing myself for the first time. And in that reflection, a stark contrast emerged. The afternoon light illuminated half of my face, while the other half remained shrouded in shadow. It seemed a cruel portrait of the situation. On one side, the hope of finding meaning; on the other, the doubt that consumed me. The light revealed lines, the marks of time, the scars of life. The darkness hid what was yet to come. I took a deep breath, aware that I inhabited precisely that space between light and shadow. Memories began to emerge more clearly. The quick conversations in the kitchen during family gatherings, the way my son-in-law would look away when I asked a simple question, my daughter's haste to end calls, as if I were an out-of-place detail. Everything was now part of the same mosaic, one I'd refused to piece together until then. It was uncomfortable to admit, but that voicemail hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It was the consequence of a plot that had been unfolding for a long time, right in front of me, and I'd chosen to believe it was just loose threads. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that perhaps part of me had sensed it all before. How many times had I ignored the weight of a sly look? How many times had I remained silent in the face of comments that sounded like a joke but left invisible scars? The silence I once believed to be protection now revealed itself as involuntary complicity. And this thought struck me hard. To what extent had my own silence helped build the stage where I was now both spectator and target? Tension grew like a lump in my throat. On one side, there was the clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. On the other, the uncertainty of what would happen when I took my next step. It was like holding a flashlight in the middle of a dense forest. The beam illuminated only a few meters, but the rest remained obscured. And I had to choose where to point that light. I stood before the mirror, without moving a muscle, as if stillness could give me answers. But all I felt was the weight of time, accumulated in my bones, in my eyes, in my memories. With each passing second, the sensation that something greater was approaching grew stronger, like muffled footsteps on wet earth. Suspense was in the air, so evident it seemed to have form. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that what came next would not only reveal secrets but would forever alter the way I saw my own story. Night arrived without asking permission, covering the house with a thick blanket. Streetlights filtered through the cracks in the curtains and scattered across the floor like shards of glass. I remained motionless, my cell phone still in my hands, and realized I wasn't just holding an object. I was holding the key to a transformation that could no longer be avoided. Within me, something had changed forever. The pain that had once bent me over now lifted me up, as if each word I heard had lit an inextinguishable flame. I looked in the mirror again and saw a different woman. The same time-scarred skin, the same eyes laden with memories, but there was a new detail: firmness. The reflection showed not only the scars, but also the resilience that grew alongside them. And it was in that moment that I understood that, although my daughter had tried to reduce me to a burden, I was the foundation. Without me, nothing in her life would have existed as it did. This awareness didn't erase the pain, but it gave me back the place that was rightfully mine. I thought about every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every gesture of love given without expecting anything in return. I remembered the smell of the bread I baked myself to ensure she had enough to eat, the days when my tired body still found the strength to smile, the silences I swallowed so as not to let her carry the weight of the world too soon. These memories, which had once made me cry, now became a foundation. They weren't signs of weakness. They were marks of a silent victory. The tension of betrayal didn't fade. It still throbbed like an open wound. But with it something greater was born. The knowledge that I could rewrite my place in this story. I wasn't a spectator, nor a passive victim. I had a voice, I had a memory. I had the truth recorded in the device that rested between my fingers. And that made me stronger than any contempt. I took a deep breath and felt the house breathe with me. The wall clock continued to tick away, but now each tick didn't sound like a threat. Sounded like the start of a new era. It was the rhythm of change, the silent announcement that nothing would ever be the same again. Between light and shadow, fear and hope, I had crossed an invisible bridge. On the other side, I wasn't the same woman who'd begun this journey. It's curious how, in moments like these, we feel the desire to leave a mark on those who listen. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of so many people who have seen themselves invisible, who have been treated as a nuisance, but who carry within themselves a strength that no one can erase. Perhaps that's why so many choose to support this kind of journey, to like, comment, share their own wounds, and stay with us, like those building an invisible network of resistance and truth. And that's also why so many decide to subscribe, so as not to lose the thread that connects each revelation, each step of this journey. When I finally put my phone down on the table, I felt a cycle close. Not the cycle of pain but of blindness. I could see everything clearly now. And though the road ahead was still shrouded in shadows, I knew I was prepared. Not because the wounds had healed, but because I'd learned to walk even with them open. The darkness of the night seemed to swallow the entire room, but I knew, within me was a flame that would not be extinguished. And this flame, so fragile and so immense, was what allowed me to look to the future without averting my eyes. Those who have come this far with me may also feel this same spark, this privilege of witnessing not only pain but transformation. And together we can recognize that, even in the deepest silence, truth always finds a way to be heard.